All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you've been enjoying the content so far, or if you've just joined, welcome. We are going to be talking a little bit about what's going on here in the US. We have a concurrent program going on right now with the UK panel, EU, and Latin America. So if you're, we want you to stay and listen to what we have to say about the US, but we do have those regional specific panels happening at the same time. So yeah, while we, I'm just going to pull up my notes real quick. So I'm Rachel Meinerding. I'm one of the co-founders of Concept Art Association, and we're an advocacy group for artists working in entertainment. And like so many of the speakers that are appearing today throughout the summit, we've all kind of been thrown into this world of generative AI. For us, it kind of came from a kind of a duty to kind of advocate and protect our members and our community. It was a kind of an issue that a lot of artists were worried and concerned about. So, we found ourselves here. So with that being said, I want to kind of hand over and just kind of give the folks that are on the panel here. They're also very invested in the issues in a number of ways. Rebecca, do you want to introduce yourself? Just give us a brief little bio of who you are.
Sure. My name is Rebecca Blake. I am a graphic designer in New York City. I'm on the board of the Graphic Artists Guild as their advocacy liaison. And the Graphic Artists Guild is a trade association of visual artists other than photographers, designers, illustrators, all animators, cartoonists, comic book artists. We span a lot of different disciplines. We've been working for many, many, many years on trying to establish policy, trying to affect how copyright registration system helps designers and illustrators. So we work a lot on labor issues, policy issues, and copyright issues, basically to support our mission, which is to permit our graphic artists survive as well remunerated professionals.
Thank you. Neil?
Hi, so I'm Neil Turkewitz. I was a long-term executive in the music industry, responsible for generating norms around the use of copyrighted materials, particularly in light of developments in technology. And then since leaving the Recording Industry Association in 2016, in theory, I'm a consultant, but I don't really consult anyone. So, I think I'm a good thinker, but I'm a terrible businessman. So I have the beauty of looking at these issues through a lens of kind of broader moral questions about what do we think about the relationship of technology to humanity, and central within that framework of humanity to the arts. So I don't represent anyone. Everything I speak to is simply my own voice, based on years of experience. I am what I would currently call an independent blogger and social media communications guy.
Fantastic. Greg?
Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Hopwood. I am a costume concept artist. I've been working in the film and television industry for about 10 years. I am a member of the Art Directors Guild, Local 800. I am a member of the Costume Designers Guild, Local 892, as well as a member of the Concept Artists Association. I work basically in television and film, conceptualizing costumes with costume designers. I work on everything from super suits, like Marvel, Amazon, or DC, all the way to working with musicians like John Legend, Ariana Grande, and Dolly Parton. I come at this from not only the standpoint of an artist who has had to adapt their skills from traditional watercolor to digital to 3D sculpting, but I also come at this as a member of the unions in the film and television industry. And I have been, just like everyone else, swept into this AI craze and trying to do my best to help where I can.
Thank you. I want to, Neil, I want to start with you, and I want everyone to kind of answer this question, but you know, like you say, a lot of the work that you're doing right now, you know, you are, I mean, you use these terms like retired. You're just kind of doing this purely out of a passion, right? For the arts, but also copyright, you know, that's something that your background is in. Can you tell me or tell us, when did you first find out about these generative AI models, and kind of what was your initial reaction to them?
As I said, so I've been involved in looking at the relationship of technology to the arts, but always, even when I had a specific function representing the music industry, my take on it was always that we were involved in the creation of rules and norms for an emerging digital society. And almost all of those, kind of starting from the mid-1990s, tended to view individual creations, individual creators, and copyright as an impediment to innovation. So that almost all of the movement out of Silicon Valley, out of the VCs in Silicon Valley, were looking at how do we remove the irritants of copyright from the things that we wanted to do. So there's been sort of a constant 25 or 30-year evolution of technology looking to get inputs for as cheap as possible, and the cheapest way of possible is simply taking, and to roll those into ideas, kind of these broad social ideas, that somehow what we were doing was democratizing either the creation or access to cultural materials. So we saw that in lots of different areas. We saw it in music, we saw it in film, but we've seen it just more broadly, almost as a political movement, the democratization of democracy. And when I first came across sort of what was happening in the AI arena, probably that was around 2017, 2018, well before generative AI was part of the picture. It dawned on me that this was simply the newest iteration of something that had been in place for a long time. The acquisition of content to drive business models at the lowest possible price, always being characterized as sort of progress and innovation in achieving efficiency and democratization. So every part of my body recoiled against this idea that now we were taking what had been sort of limited instances and applying it to the entire corpus of the world's global cultural production. All of it, someone just earlier talked about, grist for the mill for the development of AI. So I immediately started to engage. And at that point, unfortunately, I didn't really have any relationships with artists who were being directly affected. I looked at it from a broad theoretical philosophical orientation. Again, moved by this idea that we're in the process of creating the norms of a digital society, and that it was up to us to say, what should those rules look like? This shouldn't be a handful of VCs in Silicon Valley. This shouldn't be this very limited set of individuals getting to define these rules. And when I say digital society, in a sense, we could drop the digital, because the digital society is society. We've lost all of the illusory distinctions that once existed between digital and the real world. They're all part of the same thing. So I started engaging at that and looking at the frivolity of treating this very broad misappropriation as part of fair use. I mean, fair use by its terms is supposed to be in limited circumstances. And here we were talking about a misappropriation in the broadest of circumstances. So it appealed to me immediately, both in terms of my desire to fuel artists, to sustain the livelihood of artists, and not from the perspective of that I thought we owed it to artists. I think we owe it to society, to everyone who cares about the arts, to what the arts contribute to the well-being of all of us who aren't artists. So that has driven me. I also want to, and I realize I'm going a little long, but so let me end. But I just have to say, I'm so impressed with the output of individual creators in coming to the fore in this battle. I have been part of so many individual battles against the misappropriation by technology, but in almost every case, individual artists were very nervous about participating, and very nervous both because of the burnout that's been described by some previous speakers, but also because they were uncomfortable with being viewed as agents of copyright, because copyright as an individual artist wasn't always viewed as a liberating thing, right? So, but I think what Concept Artists Association has done, what lots of individual artists have done, what the plaintiffs in these class action suits, it fills me with hope, because we've changed the foundations. We've changed who's speaking. That it's no longer sort of major institutional copyright owners, who tend to not be viewed in the most favorable light. But we're talking about individuals, so it's really helped to ground this this discussion. So I really thank you guys. I think everything that's been done over the last year, everything that's continuing to be done, the role of the Concept Artists Association in fueling this, it's the value is incalculable. So
yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that is a sentiment that is echoed through a lot of people, and also just a nice reminder for everybody how quickly and how passionately everybody has come together, that we're so, I mean, I feel hopeful that we're really ahead, that we're having these conversations now. I mean, I know that there's a lot of people that are already talking to policymakers, government officials, and we're some of the first people in the door talking to them. They've heard, they obviously know about AI, but in its kind of previous iterations, not, this generative AI. So it's amazing that we're having these conversations now, because I truly believe that we're going to be able to influence what is happening in DC. Neil talked a lot about copyright. Rebecca, you have a lot of experience and background in copyright protections for creators. We know that it moves a little slowly. And do you think that this is an urgent enough need that will be able to move these conversations a little bit quicker? Like, what are you feeling about the state of it?
That is a loaded question, and the reason why I say it's a loaded question, as you can tell from Neil's response, which resonates on so many levels, is this the urgent issue? If you ask me, the urgency happened 20 years ago, and yet the creator community has been slow to respond. And I think Neil touched on something very important, which there has been an erosion in an understanding and appreciation of the value of copyrights and asserting your copyrights, particularly on the part of artists. It's been a very effective anti-copyright campaign. We have seen a steady loss in income for graphic artists, essentially since the advent of the internet, as infringement becomes easier, and as publishers and companies are able to leverage broader and broader terms in their contracts, grabbing more and more and more of the copyrights. And as the public has become used to being able to right-click and republish anything at once, and has been told that copyright squelches free speech. Copyright is the engine that drives the creative community. And it's not just an engine in terms of money. It's an engine in terms of how you control your works. Are you comfortable as an illustrator if a right-wing organization takes your image and uses it? Copyright is what permits you to control where it appears, how it appears, and what you can earn from it. I think the AI/ML question, essentially a crisis, what it has done is it has added great pressure to systemic problems that already existed, that already made it very difficult for creators to earn a living. And this is across the board. This is in the music industry, this is in the writers community, this is across the board. What we've seen in the past 20 years or so is we've actually seen creators organizations and creators start to come together. And we were able to leverage a really effective community in getting the CASE Act passed, which created a small claims tribunal for copyright cases. So you no longer have to spend $100,000 to get your copyrights, your infringements addressed. So that was the beginning. What I think this crisis is going to do, and I appreciate the work Concept Art Association has done on this, it is going to bring us together even more tightly. Because the associations, we can do what we can to affect policy, to convince the Copyright Office to put in some rules so that we get to hopefully register more than 10 works at one time, to basically make it possible for us to just earn a living. But it's up to the creators themselves to really affect change. And to do that, we need a united, grounded voice. And I think this is what this crisis is going to result in. So I'm very, very, very hopeful that we're going to start addressing some of these systemic failures, which have existed long before the AI/ML crisis.
With that, I want to just kind of ask you in very kind of lay terms, because one of the things that I'm realizing, especially from a independent artist standpoint, visual artist, is not a lot of people are copywriting their work. They don't know how to copyright their work, or they don't, in the case of someone like Greg, who's doing work for hire, doesn't own the copyright to their work. What is there anything that you could kind of say to anybody that's kind of listening, that maybe wants to learn more and wants to kind of start ensuring that maybe they do have copyright to their work?
Sure.
What can they be doing to get themselves educated on that, to start being able to protect their works?
There are a number of great organizations that have a lot of learning materials on copyright. Go to the Copyright Alliance website and do a search. They have a lot of great materials on the basics of copyrights. If you are a graphic artist, go to the Graphic Artists Guild. Again, we've got a ton of material on copyrights. But understand that the copyright is the key to your work. You wouldn't leave your car out on the street unlocked. But when you post your work online and you haven't registered the copyrights, or you haven't embedded your metadata so you can at least track where it's going, you've basically left your car out on the street with being unlocked. We understand there's huge issues with registering your copyrights in the United States. It's expensive. We're limited to 10 unpublished works in a group. There's a lot of barriers. But where you think a work is valuable, where you think a work could become viral, we really strongly recommend registering the copyright and support organizations that are working to affect change on this, because we need a fairer copyright registration for visual artists. But the first thing to understand is to change the mindset. Your copyright, that is the engine for how you can license your works and derive an income from it and control where it appears. If you're creating work made for hire works, understandably, you don't own the copyright on it. But almost every artist I know who creates work made for hire works also creates personal work, and that work has tremendous value. Does that answer the question?
That's perfect. Yeah, Neil, did you want to? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, just I completely agree with that, and artists should be encouraged to do everything they can to legally protect their works, and copyright ownership is important. Even if you're a work for hire, ultimately the value of the work you're contributing to is going to affect your finances. So yes, do the legal stuff, but don't miss the bigger picture. Bigger picture is, again, very philosophical. And I think one that resonates way beyond people who would think that they have some affinity either for the arts or for copyright in particular. And that is, what world do we want to live in? So I think that, and this is something where artists who speak to the hearts of people play a very important role, and one that will resonate very broadly. And so I would really encourage people to not get too much in the weeds of the legalities of current data scraping. Don't get too far into the weeds of the registration issues and how you would go ahead and enforce. Those are important issues, but the number one issue to keep foremost in people's minds is we're constructing new rules. And what do those rules look like? What do we want them to look like? What do we cherish? What makes life important? And I think, most people will understand that the things that make life important are the art that's around them, the music that surrounds them, the images that they have access to, the connections that are made through art. So that's a huge strength of the artistic community, and one that should be constantly repeated.
100% agree. Greg, I want to talk to you a little bit about your kind of relationship to all of this, because like we're talking about now, there's the differentiation between independent artists that have copyrighted work that they can copyright. You primarily work for hire. You don't own most of the copyright to your work. So so that's kind of one issue that we can talk about, but also your job is at risk because these tools are seemingly so effective for it, especially for concept art, right? How are the community feeling about that?
It's very intense. I mean, when I first became aware of this was a couple of years ago, when there were these small programs popping up where you could input an image, and basically at the time what we knew were filters. Throw a filter where it kind of looked a little bit more like this style, a little bit more painterly, a little bit more graphic. And from there, it just slowly evolved into what it is today. And when this first came out and all of a sudden these programs were popping up everywhere and the discussion of the data sets became very prominent in the artist community, when we were able to start searching through the data sets, it was not only as a working professional, but as just an artist at heart, someone who tries to be a part of that cultural movement of art in the world. Seeing all of my personal and professional scraped into these data sets was really intense. And I mean, the fact that I don't even own the professional side of my work, which is 95% of my entire portfolio, put me in a very odd position of wanting to fight for my work and fight for myself as an artist and being completely unable to. It's a very odd feeling that the work that I've created could potentially be used to put me out of a job. That work has been training these programs to potentially replace me. With examples of my own work, there's something very, very cosmically sick about that. But the really interesting thing that I tend to focus on too with people is the artistic community. We're a group of creatives, and sometimes we're not the most organized. Sometimes we're very hard to get together and have a cohesive movement. And that's why I think I appreciate the CAA so much, is because it has given an anchor point to these conversations to be able to gather and say, okay, what are we going to do over here? Can we approach this differently? But it really has taken a toll on the artist community. I mean, my professional friends have really struggled with this, not only dealing with the professional fallout, but just the personal, emotional side, the mental health side of this, seeing your livelihood, all of the effort that you've put into adapting to new technologies, the time you've spent honing your craft, taking courses, your entire education, the online tutorials you've watched, the different programs you've explored, all that time and effort that gets culminated into your portfolio being taken by these companies and used to churn out art by anyone who has access to the site is a really intense experience. So there is the legal side of this, there is the existential question about art, but there is also the effect it has on artists as a whole. The thing I've always been concerned of is just checking in with my colleagues and checking in with the newer artists, making sure everyone's okay, knowing that there are things going on behind the scenes, promoting these summits, promoting these speaking engagements so people can see artists and creatives fighting for this cause, because a lot of people are either scared to, are unmotivated to, because of the existential dread that is these programs. So it has been a lot, and seeing the professional community spin and have these discussions, our biggest concern is that these companies are really going to turn, whether it's our studios, and try to eliminate our classifications and our jobs as a whole. So it's a lot to deal with, but again, having something like the CAA be that grounding point for all of these discussions makes it a lot more palatable. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
No, it's great. It's great. I want to, again, just kind of switch gears again. We're talking about the current state where I think everyone's pretty much in agreement that speaking throughout the day, that the current iteration of it is unethical. No one here is also anti-tech. We're not looking to burn this to the ground. I think everyone can agree that done correctly, this could be a really great resource for creatives. We're not stifling innovation. Rebecca, I know that you are involved in a lot of kind of AI working groups. A lot of these kind of conversations are happening about like, what do we want to see for the future of these technologies so that it's benefiting creators, as well as not stifling technology. In your opinion, and in the groups that you've been kind of talking with, and I know we were going to have Joel Dweck with us today. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it. But again, I do later want to kind of touch on some of the information that he left us with that relates to this. But Rebecca, what do you think would be kind of some great solutions for the future versions of these models?
Sure. So the Graphic Artists Guild, I mean, we have a little bit of a different take on this than Concept Art Association, in that some of our members actually do use AI generative systems. Some of them are deriving additional income from it. What we need to work on as a community, and certainly within our association, is what does an ethical use of AI generative systems looks like. So the artists within the Graphic Artists Guild who are using it are using AI systems by inputting their own work, by seeing what is generated from it, by taking those results, by greatly manipulating them. In other words, they're using AI image generators as a tool, not as the be-all and end-all in creating works. And I think that's the crucial element to understanding what an ethical use of the AI image generators looks like. I've had a lot of discussions with other organizations in different disciplines, and there seems to be across the board a similar approach, that there is a use for this as a tool. There are some artists who will actually greatly benefit from this. The issue is how this came about. The issue is the fact that, 5 billion images were scraped across the internet with no thought to privacy issues, no thought to copyrights, in order to create the original training data set. And that's the crucial issue, because that's resulted in a technology that can be used to basically circumvent hiring an artist. And we've already seen Condé Nast put out a magazine cover where they boasted that it only took them something like 8 minutes to generate the cover art using an AI system. So this is where we get into real serious concerns about the ethical use. Another issue that we need to address is the use of AI systems in order to generate work which looks like it could have been created by an artist. In other words, to copy the style of an artist. So you're generating something that isn't directly infringing. You can't say this illustrator created this work already, but it looks as though it could have been made by a particular illustrator. And I think a lot of people outside the art community don't understand how damaging that is. An illustrator will spend years developing their unique approach, their mindset, their philosophy, their style. And this is something that is continually honed throughout their entire professional life. If you now have a machine learned system which can pop out illustrations that look as though they could have been made by this illustrator, you have effectively blanketed that style. If you can generate thousands of works in a particular style, then there is no longer the uniqueness that is tied to that one particular illustrator. Is that a legal concern? Style is not copyrightable. I'm an artist, so I'm not a lawyer. But from my background in advocacy, I don't see a clear path forward for a legal solution to that. But is there an ethical question? Absolutely. So I think what I'm trying to say is we are not anti-generative AI. But we have serious questions, number one, with how the original data set was created. Number two, how can artists whose work was used to create this technology be remunerated? And I think that's fair. And number three, how can we develop within our communities ethical standards so that works have true human creativity, true human authorship, even when AI systems are used as a tool?
That's great. I think that this idea of the style being uncopyrightable, do you think there's a world in which, when, let's say, best case scenario, the existing data sets no longer exist, everything is either public domain or licensed, whatever that looks like. Licensing is a bigger conversation, right, that maybe we can talk about, because that's going to look a little bit different from each industry's standpoint, and especially from a work for hire standpoint. But again, with my sort of small knowledge of how these data sets are created, could we not just say that you cannot use an artist's name, you can't tag a piece of artwork when it's in the data set with that artist name, so it would never be associated with them? Do you think that's something that could exist and that could be a work for that?
It absolutely could. And my understanding from the very brief conversation I had with your speaker from the Content Authenticity Initiative, speaking on the photography panel, my understanding is there are already technological means in order to tell what portion of a work is created by, what are the origins of works. So if you have a work that's created using an AI system, it's a derivative work. You've got the original work the illustrator created, and then you have what was contributed by the AI system. It's called a derivative work. So can we tease apart what comes from what? And apparently there are technological means to do it. However, I spoke earlier about how this is all part of a greater ecosystem. One of the great ways in order to track that would be by looking at the metadata for an image. Where do certain areas come from? There are two problems with that. Number one, most artists don't utilize their metadata. should be putting in their metadata, and they should be doing it so that Google image search puts up that their images are licensable. Most artists don't do this. This is a massive tool that we should be using. The second issue is that many platforms, including social media platforms, strip out metadata. This is a massive issue if we want to utilize a technological means that already exists to protect our work and to protect our integrity as creators. So the next thing we need to do is, and this falls outside the AI/ML discussion, but it is intricately linked to it, we have to address the issue of metadata being stripped out. It should not be possible for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, et cetera, for all these social media platforms, which have built themselves on the backs of visual artists, to be able to just strip out our metadata. And yes, it happens. And that I would love to be the next big legislative copyright battle we engage in, because we can't solve one thing and leave other gaps existing. We're still going to be vulnerable. We need to address the entire ecosystem.
Neil, you were nodding your head through a lot of that. Do you want to add anything to it?
Yeah, so one is obviously true, but I would just use some word of caution. We want to make sure that people come away feeling empowered and not as if the range of issues are so great that we can never succeed. So I think there's some use in looking at these issues from a serial perspective. Our number one issue is ensuring that works cannot be used for training without the consent of the creator. That's a huge undertaking. And I think if we succeed in that, we will have moved the ball forward immensely. The questions of whether or not in the style of raise extremely complicated, obscure, rabbinical questions about the nature of authorship and copyright. And it brings us directly into the issues of transformative use. But you can't create a work in the style of someone unless that work has already been included in the training data. So let's not take on too many things simultaneously. Let's focus first and foremost on the foundational issue, ensuring that copyrighted materials, that creative materials cannot be included in training data. We then face the more difficult questions, and I think Steven Zapata, whose opening, by the way, was brilliant. I mean, you guys are just going to have to find a way of having that on continuous loop on your website. I mean, I listened to that and I thought, okay, I can go to sleep now because there's really nothing else to be said. I mean, it truly was a brilliant exposition. But so here, I think we just need to be very practical. Take the issues. What's the number one issue? Focus on that number one issue. Subsequent to that, if we succeed, and succeeding again would be a tremendous victory, then deal with questions of aesthetics. They deal with issues of metadata. I agree. And there are a variety of new tools coming on. Again, Stephen mentioned Glaze, which will be very interesting. There are lots of other technologies that may be able to introduce poison into the images, which will then confuse AI and make it much more difficult for them to replicate in the style of things. So we will have a variety of tools. We will need engineers and kind of broad industry consensus about the utilization of those tools. But if we're there, we've already succeeded, right? I mean, so I'm always nervous, and particularly because individual creators are so much at the forefront of this, that I want to make sure that individual creators don't feel overwhelmed and that this doesn't negatively affect the ability to create. I mean, that's your profession. That's what you should be doing. So you need to make sure that the mental balance, the stability, that people don't walk away feeling dispirited. And I think we can succeed. There are lots of avenues for success. They're not all legal. They're not all political. Many of them are simply maintaining enough pressure on companies so that even if they're legally not required to do the ethical thing, there's pressure from creators and from advertisers and from other supporters of the in the financial ecosystem that will force changes. And I think if you look at the history of the last 25 years of how have changes taken place, they've taken place less as a result of a single moment of legislative reform and more as a part of an evolution where it's just grown too uncomfortable for companies to operate unethically. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues to take on, and yeah, one at a time. I want to address one of, yeah, again, Stephen's opening was brilliant, just brilliant. We knew he would be able to deliver. One of the questions that he asked is, okay, let's say we get to a place where copyrighted data has to be, step one, it's just public domain, right? And then we can kind of move into these conversations about licensing copyrighted data into the training material. Greg, again, I'm going to come back to you with this because this is going to affect you. One of the questions, which is something that I've always been concerned about from day one. Let's say Disney licensed their back catalog into the data sets. You don't own the copyright to that. There's nothing technically you can do, but there's been some conversations, and I forget who brought it up on one of the earlier panels, but this idea that we could maybe get some, and again, Neil, I'd like your opinion on this as well with the kind of law, your background. Could we get like a draft clause that work for hire creatives could maybe put in their contract to say, I don't consent to my work for hire work being included in the data sets? How do you feel about that? Do you think, like, from Greg, obviously you sign a lot of these work for hires, you kind of move from production to production. Do you think that would be something effective that we could kind of roll out and kind of come together as a creative community, musicians, authors? I know that the Authors Guild have been trying to do something like this, and Joel, who was supposed to be on the call, that with the Society of Lyricists and Composers, they've also been kind of having this conversation. I'd love to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that's the concern, isn't it? Is that we don't own the rights to these works. So what happens if the studio systems, every studio who does own our individual group of work, if Warner Brothers, Disney, name any massive studio, decided to build their own data set legally with all of the images and content that they own? That's an incredibly interesting and disturbing process altogether. Within a group of my colleagues, we have discussed the idea of a deal memo. When we are contracted for work, initially we are brought in, we speak with a producer, director, UPM, someone that hashes out the deal points of our hiring. And the discussion has turned to how powerful, how legally enforced, and how binding is that deal memo, because ultimately everything gets put into writing. For a long time, the confines of our job has always been kind of colloquially spoken about. Within our guild specifically, there's discussions of, okay, who can or cannot touch a rack of clothing? These arbitrary rules that are kind of just discussed. The deal memo brings to question, does that supersede any smaller discussion of rules? And if I were to put in an inclusionary into my deal memo of saying, I would like to make sure that my work is not included in any data sets or used in perpetuity for the studio, how binding is that discussion? Or within the union system, does this need to become union regulation? The place where we are very blessed, and it's not a perfect system, that we have a shield against most harm in this industry because of our unions. They protect our best interest. So every series round of negotiations that we go into, these issues can be broached. And if it becomes within the studio system that these issues of AI and data sets and the control of our work becomes a part of the contract negotiation, that would be a very interesting battle that I would be curious to see what the fruits of it were. Because we are outside of the IATSE, I believe the Screen Actors Guild, the Writers Guild, as well as I believe the DGA, the Directors Guild, are about to go into their next round of negotiations. And AI is a hot button topic right now. So to what extent will our unions be fighting for this? I believe that touching on the idea of making sure that even if we technically don't own it, can we make sure that it won't be included in the data set? That's a very tricky, fine line to try and get that included. But I would be very interested to see how that would all turn out, because again, myself, I am not against technological innovation. I am completely here for the advancement of these technological programs, but it should not come at the cost of working creatives. End of story. So these discussions of the data sets, you kind of have two methodology here. Either you edit the existing system, which would be legally a minefield also for these companies, to dive into what work has been used, how to unscrape it from their programs would be a nightmare. Also, the discussion of completely eradicating them and start over is insane. So it's where does this editing process come from? But I think I'm very lucky to be included within the union system, where we do have the ability to kind of self-regulate or to start the process of regulation. Again, my concern is the artist community at large, and how would they, outside of that system, be able to negotiate those things. The discussion of metadata, the discussion of these poison programs that you include into your artwork. Again, I think the biggest issue is putting the burden on the artist to stave all of this off. And that's where the discussion of, like, not the mental health, but the strain that that puts on artists, even more than the career of a working artist already is. I think we have even spoke, it shouldn't be an opt-out, it should be an opt-in methodology. So with the opt-out, the way it currently is, it's putting all the burden on the artist to go back into all their different portfolio sites, all their websites that they post their work, and trying to make sure their work isn't already included in it. As far as I believe, it should be an opt-in model from the get-go. Don't know if that fully answered your question, but.
No, it was great. We have 8 minutes left. I just want to kind of end on, what can we all be doing to continue to affect change? We keep talking about like a multi-pronged approach, that it has to be a multi-pronged approach. And I know Neil is like, one of the people that we've been speaking to a lot about this. There are many ways that we can approach this, right? At Concept Art Association and many other guilds I know that have lobbyists are in DC, making sure that artists' voices are at the table. Costs a lot of money to have a lobbyist, so which is thank you everyone that donated to our GoFundMe. But Neil, what are some things that people can be doing on kind of a smaller stage independently to continue to affect change?
So so a number of things. So one, fund, organize where possible, because organization is important, and you need to have, it's sort of interesting right now in Washington. It's not clear that there's a legislative agenda, but you and I have talked about this before. One of the key things about effective lobbying is that you want to be able to talk to policymakers 9 times before you ever ask them to do something, because the whole process is making sure that they understand the issues. So it's really important to start to engage with policymakers, with their staffs, even though it's not clear that we want any legislative action. So that's certainly one thing to do. Obviously, the lawsuits are a critical part of that, but I think, and here I just reach out to everyone and say, please don't put all your eggs in that litigation basket. As I've written, and others have written, we don't believe that it's fair use, but it's possible the court will determine that it's fair use. no one should view that as the end of the campaign. That would simply be a change in the campaign. It would then be clear that in fact there's legislation that needs to be passed to modify a court decision on fair use. The number one issue, and I referred to this earlier, is just remember that we're in a war to win minds, and we're not going to win anything else. We're not going to win legislation. We're not going to win changes in corporate practices unless we affect the way people think about this. And I think this is the area where I've been most impressed with the artist community for its willingness to talk about how these issues affect them, to talk about the morality. One of the things that I do, and I would urge other people to continue to do this, is to make our issues part of the broader questions about AI. Again, because we really are constructing the rules for digital society, and those rules should be based on consent. Right? Isn't that consent goes way beyond the issue of the inclusion of artistic materials into training data. It goes to, do we really want the singularity? Do we want to be creating this environment in which humans and computers are merged into a single entity in the vision of Ray Kurzweil and other Silicon Valley guys? To me, that's the most terrifying image that we could possibly have. And who is best positioned to stand in between that forced collective and the kind of individual society that we want? And that's artists. Artists speak to the questions we have, the dreams that we have, the beauty and poetry that give meaning to life. So I think my number one thing that I would urge everyone is, don't be dissuaded, use everything in your capacity, always be reasonable, recognize that people of goodwill won't always agree with us, so let's be as kind as possible. I'm a huge believer in kindness. So let's engage in all of these things. Don't be dissuaded, don't get burned out. If you're feeling burned out, step back for a moment, because we need everyone. We are fighting a revolution, and it's a very interesting revolution. It's a revolution for the soul, and unlike, I think, other revolutions in the world.
Rebecca, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I kind of want to tailgate on what Neil was saying, and I think Neil made a really good point that, an individual artist is going to get completely burned out when they take a look at just the entire landscape of where there are different, failures. So I just want to let people know, you've got great associations doing these battles for you. The Graphic Artists Guild is volunteer run. Concept Art Association is volunteer run. Society of Illustrators, great board. There are a bunch of really great associations that are actually doing the work on trying to talk to legislators, talking to the Copyright Office, doing that hard work. So know that they've got your back, but support the associations, because we're doing it on a dime and we're facing very deep pockets. So we do need your support. We've got your back. And then what you can do as an individual is, follow your best practices, register copyrights where you can, put in your metadata where you can, just build in some decent workflows so that your work is you're protecting your work, you're being sensible about it. These assets you're creating are incredibly valuable. And then the third thing is, when you do get burnt out, go to your peers, turn to each other, and rejuvenate yourselves, and realize this is a very long battle. It'll be a battle for eternity, because we're talking about individual creators up against great big market forces. This battle will never be won, but we will gain ground, and we have been gaining ground. I've been doing this for 30 years now as a volunteer. I'd like to point out, it gets very addicting if you do get involved with your associations, very addicting. But I can tell you that in the past several years, we've seen the arts community come together, we've seen creators come together, and we actually seen these major players taking micro steps to recognizing that they cannot kill the goose that laid the golden egg, because that's us, we're the geese. So just be heartened. You know, you're going to get burnt out, take a break, come back. We got your back.
Beautiful. Greg?
I think everything that's been said is absolutely accurate. I would just say keep close with one another, check in with one another, discuss these things, find either local officials who are getting involved with this, local associations. If you see a protest or a boycott that is discussing these issues online, whether it's against platforms using having unethical practices, or it's trying to benefit off the back of artists, participate, be involved with this discussion. I know artists have a lot of tendency, especially in my industry, keep their heads down, work at the cost of everything else happening around them. It's very easy to get sucked into the work. If you see something going on that your friends are participating in, join in the discussion. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And this is so important to just the cultural aspect of art as a whole. So if you are an artist, get involved with this discussion in any way you can. Also, I posted the GoFundMe link for the CAA on my Instagram and the link in my bio, so it's there if anyone wishes to contribute as well.
Thank you, Greg. So yeah, that's our time. Thank you everybody for coming. We have panels happening all the way until 6 o'clock Pacific time. There's a short break now, so if you've been here with us since 8:30, go to the bathroom, go grab something to eat. You're going to want to come back at 12 Pacific. Just make sure you do not miss the AI ethics panel, because we have some amazing speakers on there. And then stick around for the discipline panels. Those are going to be really great. If for whatever reason you missed anything up until now, everything is being uploaded to AIMLmediaadvocacy.com in real time. So as the panels are finished, they're up there for you to rewatch. Share them, and yeah, just keep staying educated. And thank you everybody for coming, and thank you to our amazing panelists today to talk about what's going on in the US. But yeah, thank you everyone.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.